Hi, if more libertarian economic policy is preferable to you, why did the economy do quite well historically with left-leaning economic policies in place, more specifically in time period from the New Deal to Nixon?
So the economy did extraordinarily poorly from the time of the New Deal all the way up until World War II. UCLA economists suggest that the Great Depression was lengthened by a minimum of 8 years by the economic policies that were purveyed by FDR and his arbitrary and foolish economic policy, which really predated him. Hoover was instituting the same exact policies right after the crash of 1929. So those policies really extended from like 1929 all the way to the outbreak of World War I. The economic growth that took place until World War II, rather. The economic growth that took place in the aftermath of World War II was a result of several factors. One was actual deregulation of the economy. Remember, there was rationing during World War II. Also, the entire world was destroyed except for the United States. When you are the only mass producer still available on planet Earth and every other Western country has been decimated, that provides a pretty good export market, as it turns out. And so there wasn't a lot of competition in the marketplace. As other countries developed, then they were able to compete better in terms of manufacturing, which is why you see the car industry in the United States slowing down in the 1970s and 1980s. As far as the idea that economic growth is tied to heavy government interventionism, that obviously is untrue to the extent that the heavier the government intervention, the less economic growth there is. I don't have to cite Venezuela or Cuba. So the question is, even if you believe that government interventionism is good for the economy, which I don't, then where do you think the happy medium lies? Is it the policies of FDR and LBJ? Or is it possible that the policies of the early 1920s, which were economic boom times for the United States and were extraordinarily libertarian, are better economic policies? There's a reason that entrepreneurs, business owners seek out places where they are taxed less and regulated less. There's a reason that the United States is still the world's most powerful economy, and it's because of all the developed countries, we are the least regulated and in many cases the least taxed, although not on a corporate level. So government interventionism, the record that government interventionism has caused economic strength in the United States is scanty at best. I mean, that correlation does not even match up, in my opinion.
So I actually have two questions.
Right.
The first one is, how do you account for like statistical manipulation when you present your facts that you presented in the beginning? So more specifically, when you were talking about percentages of blacks in X, Y, and Z, and when you were talking about the differences in wages today versus 20 to 50 years ago, how do you account for A, the difference in population among blacks versus whites or other races, and B, how do you account for the increasing gap between the middle class and the upper class?
Okay, so sorry, two things. There are two questions there. On any given statistic, I would bet we'd have a more productive conversation if I could actually give you the source. You could look up the source, and then you could ask specific questions about how those numbers were arrived at, because I'm giving you the bottom line, but I'm happy to give you the footnotes. I typically don't do that because it makes the speech even longer and more boring than it already is. But I'm more than happy to argue the stats and whether they're good or not, because it might be like that other guy questioning the Bureau of Justice Statistics stats. Right? There might be a flaw in the stat, and then we can argue about that. So that's a good question. The answer is we'll look at each individual stat and we'll determine whether we think that it's reflective of reality or not based on its internal logic. As far as the idea that how do I account for the gap between the upper class and the non-upper class, as I said, number one, it's not the same people in the upper class. Right? People move up and down between classes fairly regularly in the United States. There is a widening gap in terms of the people who are earning the most and the people who are earning the least, but that's because if you had to make a chart, it wouldn't look like this. It wouldn't look like the people at the top are going like that and people at the bottom are going like that. It would look like this, right? The people at the bottom are moving up slightly, and the people at the top are moving up rapidly. That's because investment income has done really well under the stock market, for example. So if you had money to put in the stock market, that's been doing really well for you over the past several years, which suggests that one of the ways that you get out of poverty is to save and then get into the stock market. Right? The point here is that when people focus on income inequality, I think that this is actually a rather large moral mistake. I think that focusing on poverty is a good thing to do. I think focusing on income inequality is not a good thing to do because there's no correlation between income inequality and relative rates of poverty. Right? There's tremendous income inequality in a lot of places on planet Earth. In fact, in all places on planet Earth. If you go to Sudan, there's going to be a rich warlord there, and then there are going to be a bunch of people living on $6 a year. Okay, that's a terrible place to live. Income inequality in the United States is also quite high, right? There are people who are Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, and then there's the local checker at your grocery store. But if the local checker at your grocery store is getting richer, then it seems to me they have nothing particularly to complain about in how the economy is operating. They don't have a right to Jeff Bezos' money. They don't have a right to Bill Gates' money any more than Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos has a right to their money. So the question shouldn't be relative rates of increase. The question should be, is your income increasing? Is your life getting better? Can you buy more cool stuff? And one of the problems I have with just measuring income by the pure dollar amount is that it doesn't actually measure what you can buy with those dollars. Right? The fact is that you can buy things today that you couldn't buy even 5 years ago, certainly not 10 or 20 years ago. Life is completely transformed. A poor person in the United States today is living better than a rich person was living in the United States in 1920. Right? Everybody has air conditioning, everybody has a microwave, everybody has a car, everybody has a TV or two. Right? All of these things did not exist. That's because the market has created new products for which there is demand. That does not mean that poverty has been completely solved, because I think it's going to be almost impossible to completely solve poverty. But it does mean that if you're complaining because people at the upper end are getting richer rather than because you're getting poorer, then you should look to whether you are operating on the basis of jealousy or whether you're operating on the basis of something that actually should matter.